In the heart of the Mbale clan, where the sun scorched the earth and the elders' words carried more weight than the winds, a girl named Noria was born under a quiet moon. She didn't cry like the others did at birth. Instead, she blinked slowly, as if she had arrived from a place of silence and was unsure whether to stay. Her voice, when it came, was soft as rain on dry leaves, so soft that even when she called out, birds did not fly away. While the other children shouted and fought over baobab fruit, Noria watched from the shadows, smiling gently and offering what she had, even if it was just her quiet company. From the beginning, Noria's kindness was mistaken for weakness, and in a land where men were thunder and women were the soil beneath their feet, being soft was dangerous. Her mother, a weaver with clever hands and a warm laugh, had protected her for as long as she could. She would hold Noria close at night, telling her tales of women who sang to the stars and turned pain into magic. But death came like it always did, fast and unfair. A fever took her mother before Noria had learned more than a few of the old songs. She was left in the care of her father, a man who believed grief was weakness and silence was strength. His heart, already dry and cracked, became harder with each passing day. When he brought Madoni into their home, it was not with love but necessity. Madoni was a widow with a sharp tongue and sharper hands, and she saw Noria as no more than extra baggage. "You eat like a queen and work like a mouse," she hissed at the girl within days of arriving. The food became scarcer. The lashes more frequent. Noria slept on a mat near the ashes of the hearth while Madoni and her two sons feasted and laughed in the next room. But Noria never raised her voice. She swept the compound, fetched water, and folded clothes with the same gentle grace she had as a child. She whispered to the birds and sang to herself in the afternoons, her voice barely louder than the breeze. When she turned 15, Madoni found herself in debt after losing a gambling match to the wife of the clan's chief. Rather than pay with coin or pride, she chose to offer Noria's hand in marriage to Baroka, the warrior who had earned both fear and admiration across Mbale. Baroka was a man of tall frame and straight posture, with a voice that could still a room and a smile that made women lower their eyes. He had cattle, land, and scars from the many battles he'd survived. But beneath his charm, there lived a beast coiled tight with rage and entitlement. Still, the elders spoke of his deeds in war, not his cruelty in private. When he agreed to marry Noria, the village whispered about her luck, to be chosen by such a man. Noria did not cry at the announcement. She simply nodded, bowed her head, and began preparing her own wedding garments with trembling fingers. Madoni told her to be grateful. "You were born with nothing, and now you are the wife of a great man." A great man. But Noria only looked out the window that night, watching the stars blink in the dark sky, remembering her mother's stories. The wedding was modest but crowded. Women painted her face with clay and oils, braiding her hair in long strands that brushed against her back. She was dressed in white and gold, though no one noticed the way her hands trembled under the cloth. Baroka stood proud beside her, smiling wide for the guests, gripping her hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Everyone cheered. No one saw the way she flinched when he leaned in close and whispered, "I don't like disobedient women." That night, in his compound where laughter had died and only silence reigned, Noria entered her new home. She moved slowly, barefoot across the cool floor, eyes cast down. Baroka poured himself palm wine and watched her like a hunter watches prey. When she hesitated to undress quickly enough, he struck her, not with a slap, but a clenched fist to the side. The force sent her reeling against the wall. Her breath caught, but no scream escaped her lips. She simply touched the spot and looked at him, wide-eyed, as if trying to understand the new rules of this life. "You'll learn," he said simply, drinking again. That was how her nights became. Quiet and cruel. She served him meals, obeyed his commands, and endured his wrath. Her body bruised, but her voice never rose. She remembered her mother's lullabies, "Turn your pain into silence, and silence into stone." It became her mantra. Baroka came and went, sometimes ignoring her for days, other times dragging her across the room for something as small as forgetting to warm his water. The worst night came after she burned his stew. The coals had eaten it too fast while she went to fetch herbs, and when he tasted the bitterness, his face changed. Without a word, he stood, reached for his club, and came toward her like a storm. She begged, not with words, but eyes. But he saw no reason to stop. He struck her left leg. Then her right. She screamed once, a sound that echoed off the walls like a wild animal. Then came the snap, a sickening, brutal crack that silenced even the birds outside. She collapsed, unable to rise. Barocca stood over her, breathing hard, sweat glistening on his skin. "Crawl," he said coldly. "You can't serve me standing anyway." He left the hut, leaving the door open and the night wind to settle in. Noria lay in the dark, her legs twisted, her breath shallow, the pain searing through every bone and thought. She tried to move, inching herself toward the fire pit, but the agony made her vision blur. Tears fell, not from fear, but from fury she didn't yet understand. The stars outside blinked again, as if watching her crawl like an animal. And for the first time in her life, Noria felt something deep inside her break, not just her bones, but her silence. The hut smelled of rot and damp earth. Its roof sagged with the weight of old thatch, and the walls bore the scars of rain and time. It had no window, just a gap in the side where wind slipped in and mice darted through. This was where they left her, cast away like spoiled meat. When Barocca dragged her broken body to the edge of the village, no one stopped him. No elder raised a voice, no neighbor asked questions. They only muttered that Noria was cursed. That any woman who screamed that loud must have summoned spirits into her bones. That pain like hers must be punishment, not cruelty. She had not stood since the night her leg shattered. She remembered the sound of the snap more than the pain now. It echoed inside her every time she blinked. The floor was hard and cold. Her mat was thin. Each shift of her body was a fresh scream inside her throat. Days blurred. There was no food but a gourd of water, refilled once by a scowling boy who dropped it without a word and fled like she might infect him. Noria stopped counting the days. Her mouth dried. Her fingers trembled. Flies gathered at her wounds. And yet, in the darkness, her mind wandered to brighter places. She remembered the river, wide, glittering under the sun like it had swallowed stars. She used to dance there with the other girls, their feet kicking up dust, their arms lifted high. Noria had twirled so fast her feet barely touched the ground. The water would sing with her, and her laughter was free then, like a bird finally let out of its cage. Her mother would sit by the edge, weaving reeds into bracelets and smiling softly. "You have wings in your soul," her mother once said, tying a strand of cowrie shells around her ankle. But remember, even birds break when they fall too fast. Now, her wings were crushed. Her body was a ruin. But something inside her refused to die. On the 5th day, maybe the 6th, the door creaked. Noria tried to sit up but collapsed with a grunt. A shadow moved into the room, slow and steady. The scent of herbs followed, bitter and sharp. A cane struck the floor with each step. It was Aguta. Everyone in the clan knew her as the Bone Witch. She lived beyond the outer fields, in a crooked shack by the forest edge. Children were told to fear her, to never meet her eyes or accept her food. They said she cooked bones into powder and cursed warriors with sickness. But Noria, half blind with fever, saw not a witch but a woman of ash-colored skin and eyes that held both sorrow and fire. Aguta knelt beside her without a word, placing a bundle of leaves on the floor. She inspected Noria's wounds with a silence deeper than pity. Then she sighed, low and long. "They have thrown you away like cracked pottery," she muttered. "But even shattered things remember their shape." She pressed a cloth soaked in bitter-smelling liquid against the wounds, causing Noria to hiss in pain. "Good," Aguta said, "pain means there's still life in you." Every evening, Aguta returned. She brought roots to chew, pastes to dull the fire in Noria's limbs, and bandages soaked in oils that cooled the bruises. She told no one. No one noticed. The clan had erased Noria from their thoughts, as if she had never danced, never laughed, never belonged. On the 7th night, while the wind howled outside, Aguta lit a small bowl of herbs and let the smoke curl toward the ceiling. You know of Abia? She asked. Noria shook her head. She walks with the broken, Aguta whispered. She was once a queen, they say. Her husband shattered her spine in rage. But death rejected her, and the spirits fed her fire instead. Now she watches women like you, the forgotten, the beaten, the buried alive. She waits for the moment you stop begging for mercy and start calling for justice. That night, Noria could not sleep. Her body ached, but her mind burned. She stared into the dark, repeating the name, Abia. Abia. The next morning, she whispered her first prayer. Not loud. Not proud. Just a whisper shaped like a question. If you see me, Abia, don't leave me here. The prayers became routine. Every night. As Aguta worked her limbs and set broken bones into place, Noria whispered. Not for rescue, but for strength. Something was shifting beneath her skin. The pain was still there, but it no longer ruled her. It became part of her. Like stone becomes part of the riverbank after years of storms. Aguta taught her old words. Spells without chance. Power without rage. Healing, she said, is a silent rebellion. But there comes a day when silence must be broken. Noria listened. She swallowed every tale. Every warning. Every secret herb the woman crushed into her tea. And slowly, her body began to knit itself back together. The bones were still weak, but the fire inside her legs began to glow again. Her toes twitched. Her fingers steadied. She was not just mending, she was becoming. Then came the dream. Noria stood barefoot on cracked earth, the sky above her red and endless. She took a step forward. Her legs no longer screamed. Another step, and flames burst behind her feet. Not burning her, but following her, as if her path itself was awakening. She walked faster. The fire roared louder. Behind her, shadows fled. Before her, the horizon split open like a wound. She woke gasping, her face wet with sweat, heart pounding like a drum of war. She sat up, shakily. For the first time in weeks, she could feel her legs supporting her weight. Her arms braced her sides. Her fingers gripped the floor. She was not healed. But she was no longer broken. And someone, was walking with her now. The days in Bale began to twist in strange ways. The wind carried whispers it once ignored. Fires that burned steadily in the hearths of clan homes now sputtered and died when Noria wept. Goats refused to graze near her hut. Dogs howled at night but never approached. Even the children who once threw stones at her door now crossed the path with heads down, muttering silent prayers as they passed. Something had changed, and everyone felt it. Inside the mud hut, Noria sat still, her hands folded on her lap, breath steady. Her eyes no longer searched for rescue. They burned with quiet knowing. The pain in her legs had dulled, replaced with an ache deeper than nerves or flesh. It was as if her bones were whispering to her, twisting, grinding, not in agony, but in transformation. She first noticed it after the second dream. Again, she was walking in fire. Again, the sky pulsed red. But this time, she was not alone. A woman walked beside her, tall, veiled in shadows, her skin made of cracked obsidian, her eyes like smoldering coals. When she spoke, her voice cracked the sky. You called me, child. I heard you from beneath the river. I saw your bones crushed and your voice buried. But I do not save, I awaken. Noria reached out in the dream. The woman took her hand and placed something small and glowing in her palm. It burned through her skin and disappeared. She woke with a gasp, heart thundering. And for the first time, she felt it, a pulse inside her bones, as if something ancient and watchful now lived there. Aguta entered shortly after dawn, as always, her cane tapping against the packed earth. Her face froze when she looked at Noria. Your eyes, she whispered. They've changed. Noria tilted her head. How? Aguta stepped closer, squinting. They're darker. like a storm before it breaks. That day, she did not bring herbs or poultices. Instead, she brought a bowl of salt, a string of dried lizards, and a feather blacker than night. She laid them before Noria in silence, then knelt beside her. "She has marked you," Aguta said finally. "Abia does not come lightly. When she enters, she plants herself in the marrow. What you feel, the twitching, the reshaping, that is not pain. It is inheritance." Noria swallowed hard. "What does she want?" "She wants you to rise," Aguta said. "But not as a girl." Her eyes narrowed. "As something the clan cannot explain. Something they will fear." Outside, the wind howled. In the village center, Baroka threw his head back in laughter as he shared palm wine with the elders. His voice boomed across the square, full of charm and praise. "She was weak," he said of Noria. "Her bones cracked like twigs. I did what any man would do to silence madness." The elders nodded, sipping slowly, though a few glanced toward the forest path. They had heard things. Whispers of smoke gathering at Noria's door. Of a shadowy woman seen walking near the outer fields at night. Of sudden fevers and spoiled crops. Perhaps, one of the elders muttered, "We should call a priest. Just to be sure." Baroka smirked. "You think a broken girl can haunt us?" But in his heart, he felt something he had never known before, unease. Back in the hut, Noria watched the fire Aguta had built flicker low. The flames were weak tonight. She stared at them, her fingers trembling. A wave of heat rushed through her chest. Without meaning to, she clenched her fists. The fire flickered, then went out. Aguta said nothing. She only nodded. It has begun. The next few days blurred into one long transformation. Noria's body ached constantly, not from old wounds, but from reshaping. Her spine cracked as she sat, lengthening. Her legs trembled, not from weakness but from power returning. Her voice deepened, too, not in pitch, but in presence. When she spoke, even the wind paused to listen. She started hearing things. A woman's voice, low and echoing, sometimes hummed lullabies only her mother used to sing. Sometimes she'd hear weeping, distant, then suddenly close. Aguta warned her, "Do not run from the voices. They are memories made flesh. The spirits test your mind before your body." Each night, Noria dreamed of herself in fire, walking, then running, then flying, the sky bleeding behind her. The obsidian woman followed, always silent, always watching. Then came the full moon. The night was unnaturally quiet. No insects. No birds. Even the trees refused to rustle. Noria sat alone. Aguta had not come. For the first time, the hut felt like it was breathing, expanding and shrinking with her heartbeats. She placed her hands on the ground, pressed down, and slowly shifted her weight. Her arms trembled. Her knees wobbled. Her bones screamed, not in protest, but like warriors shouting into battle. Then, she stood. The pain was blinding. Tears sprang to her eyes. But she stood, her feet flat, her back straight. The wind outside stopped. Inside her, something pulsed. A heartbeat that was not hers. She took one step forward. The earth beneath her feet vibrated. Another step. The bowl of ashes at the corner tipped over. Another step, and her shadow stretched impossibly long across the wall, its shape twisting into wings. Noria was no longer crawling. She was rising. The sky darkened not because of clouds, but as if the sun itself had turned its face away. It began the moment Noria stepped beyond the crooked door of the mud hut. Her bare foot touched the earth, and something ancient stirred, an invisible ripple that passed through soil, stone, and spirit alike. Trees rustled violently, even though there was no wind. Birds took flight in terrified clusters. Dogs howled, one after the other, their cries merging into an eerie chorus that echoed across the village. The first to see her was a boy fetching water from the well. His pail fell from his hands, clanging as he ran to his mother, wide-eyed and screaming, "The cursed one walks. The cursed one walks." Women paused in their cooking, men halted in their farming, and children dropped their games mid-giggle. Noria stood just beyond the line of huts, still leaning on her staff fashioned from a twisted branch Aguta had left her. Her dress clung to her body, simple and stained with ash, but she stood with the stillness of a mountain, her eyes fixed on the village center. One step. Then another. The earth did not crack, but it remembered her. With each step she took, leaves turned in their branches to face her. Dust curled at her feet and blew backward, as if the ground itself was bowing. A flock of birds burst from the trees and circled above her, not in menace, but in orbit. Whispers began to buzz like flies in the village. Some villagers muttered, "Witch." Others dared to say, "Spirit." But no one spoke too loud. Their mouths felt heavy, as though words might anger whatever had risen from that hut. Baroka stood on the porch of the chieftain's gathering house, watching her approach. At first, he laughed, a short, scoffing sound meant to mask his unease. But as she drew nearer, something in his gut turned. She did not limp. She did not stumble. She walked as if her steps were prophesied. Their eyes met. His laughter died. Noria passed him without blinking, without pausing, and entered the heart of the village, the fire circle. No woman ever sat there without permission. It was the place of elders, warriors, and spirits of the honored dead. Yet Noria stepped into it as though the fire had called her home. She lowered herself slowly, deliberately, and sat cross-legged beside the flames, staring into them as if in silent conversation. The fire, which moments before had danced normally, now flared higher, licking the air with tongues of orange and blue. No one dared to stop her. Aguta arrived shortly after, panting and leaning on her cane. She looked at Noria from the edge of the circle, her eyes shining with both pride and warning. She said nothing, but Noria knew what she meant. Her first step was not just survival, it was declaration. And with declarations came war. When the crowd finally scattered and night crept in, Aguta approached her alone. The old woman dropped beside her with a groan, her bones old but her spirit unyielding. "You've done it," Aguta said softly. "The spirits know your name now. They've carved it into the air. But girl, you must understand, this cannot end with walking. You must finish what was started." Noria didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her fingers tightened slightly around her staff. Baroka, from the shadows of the chief's hut, was seething. He hadn't meant to be afraid, but the image of her stepping out of that hut would not leave him. That broken girl, the one he left crawling in the dark like an insect, now stood taller than ever, and had taken a seat among men without asking. He couldn't let it stand. That night, while the village slept uneasily, Baroka moved silently through the dark. His shadow slid across walls like a vulture hunting something wounded. He wore no armor. He brought no weapon. His rage would be enough. He remembered how easy it had been to strike her down before. A girl who didn't fight back. A girl who believed she deserved silence. But he didn't know that silence had turned into steel. The moon hid behind thick clouds. Crickets ceased their chirping. Noria sat alone in her hut again, no fire this time, just stillness and the soft rhythm of breath. She heard him before she saw him, footsteps heavy with anger. She didn't move. The door slammed open. Baroka stood there, a silhouette of wrath. "You disgrace," he growled, stepping inside. "You think standing makes you worthy? You think walking makes you feared?" She turned her head slowly to look at him, no fear in her gaze. Only pity. "I should have ended you," he said, stepping forward, grabbing her arm. "Let's see if your bones still bend." He raised his hand. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. Instead, the shadows on the wall twisted behind her, moving unnaturally. Baroka paused mid-strike, his hand hanging in the air, trembling. He looked at her eyes again, and for the first time, saw nothing of the girl he once knew. There was something else in her now. Something watching him from behind her gaze. And just as his hand fell, something stopped him. Not force, not flesh. But a presence. Baroka staggered back, clutching his chest as if breath had left him. The hut grew colder. The floor beneath him pulsed like a heartbeat. Noria stood again, slowly, her shadow stretching to the ceiling like a beast preparing to rise. She still did not cry. And this time, it was Baroka who crawled backward, out the door, into the dirt, gasping. The villagers found him there at dawn, wide-eyed and wordless, staring at the hut as if it housed a god. And Noria? She was already walking toward the river. The moment Baroka's hand struck Noria's cheek, a searing pain surged through his arm. It wasn't the pain of bruised knuckles or torn muscle, it was fire. Real, blistering fire. He yelped and yanked his arm back, cradling it like a wounded beast. Smoke rose from his palm, and for a heartbeat, he believed he had plunged his hand into a live flame. Noria didn't flinch. Her eyes, oh, those eyes, now glowed faintly in the dimness of the hut, like embers beneath ash. Her skin shimmered with a strange energy, subtle but undeniable. She looked at Baroka, not with hatred, not even with vengeance, but with a terrifying kind of calm. It was the gaze of one who had transcended pain. It was the gaze of Abia. Baroka stumbled backward, nearly falling, clutching his scorched hand. What are you?" he whispered, his voice dry with fear. The silence between them pressed in like fog, thick and suffocating. And in that stillness, something deep within Baroka cracked, not his bones, but memory. A sudden surge of images burst forth from the recesses of his mind, unbidden and raw. He was a boy again, no older than 10, hiding under a bed as his father roared drunk with power. He watched through slats as his mother screamed, as her blood stained the walls, as her eyes turned to him, not begging for help, but begging for him to forget. He remembered the nights he wet himself in fear. The days he promised he would never become like the monster who raised him. But he had. He became worse. His breath quickened as shame crept in, bitter and suffocating. But Noria didn't look at him like a monster. She looked at him as if she knew. As if she saw the cycle, and had already decided she wouldn't be its next link. Baroka turned and fled, limping, mumbling incoherent curses as if they could protect him from the fire in his bones. By sunrise, the tail had already slithered through the village like smoke through a grass roof. Baroka tried to strike her again, they whispered. But his hand caught fire. She didn't even move. Her eyes glowed like moonfire. The spirit of Abia walks with her. The elders gathered in tense whispers beneath the sacred tree, their faces pinched with uncertainty. Chief Ndale, old and worn but still proud, tapped his staff and said, "We have two choices. We banish her before she becomes too powerful, or we worship her before she chooses vengeance." "She's just a woman," one elder argued, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," said another. "She's the sign. The spirit we were warned about in the old prophecies. The one born of bones and silence." While the elders debated her fate, something more dangerous was brewing quietly, among the women. It began with glances. Then with soft footsteps at dusk. Then with hushed visits to the edge of the river, where Noria now sat daily, legs folded, eyes closed, speaking only to the wind. One by one, the women came. At first, they didn't speak. They simply sat. Mothers, daughters, wives, widows. Women who had been beaten, ignored, discarded. Women who had no voice in the clan of Baal. But now, there was one among them who had risen from broken bones. One who burned the hand of a warrior with a glance. One who no longer bowed her head. They brought her water, food, herbs, not out of pity, but reverence. And slowly, one by one, they began to speak. Not to her, but in her presence. "I was 9 the first time he touched me. I lost 3 children. No one knows their names. They call me Baron, but he's the one who comes home drunk every night." Noria listened. That was all. But somehow, it was everything. She became a silent fire at the heart of a movement no one had dared to dream of. Even young girls who barely understood what was happening felt the shift. They played differently. They carried sticks like staffs. They drew spirals in the dust, the same symbol that had begun to appear, mysteriously, on stones near Noria's hut. When asked what the mark meant, Aguta simply said, Ebia. One morning, as the mist still clung to the village paths, a boy no older than 6 wandered into Noria's hut. He wasn't from Bale. His clan lived across the river, nomads who passed through once a year to trade salt and honey. He stared at her with large eyes, brown and full of wonder. Without fear, he approached and placed his tiny hand on her knee. You are the one, he said softly. From my dream. Noria looked down, startled, but the boy did not flinch. You were walking through fire, he continued. And the fire didn't burn you. It followed you. And then the river rose and washed away all the bad things. His voice was calm. Certain. Before she could speak, his mother burst into the hut, breathless and frantic. When she saw her son beside the cursed woman, she gasped, but the child turned and said, Don't be scared. She's the one. The woman froze. And slowly, knelt. The news traveled faster than ever before. A child had touched her. A child had seen her in dreams. A child from another clan. To the elders, it was prophecy fulfilled. To the women, it was confirmation. To Baroka? It was the beginning of his unraveling. Because even in the dark, far from the village fires, even in his drunken solitude, he could feel the mark still burning in his palm. And he knew. The warrior who once ruled through fear, now finally understood what it meant to feel it. The moon was high and swollen like a watcher's eye when the women gathered beneath the twisted fig tree on the outskirts of Bale. Their feet were bare, silent against the cool earth. They came in pairs, or alone, wrapped in shawls and secrecy. These were not women seeking war. They were seeking air, room to breathe, space to speak, and someone to listen. And they found all of that in Noria. She did not stand before them like a prophet. She sat cross-legged on a mat of woven reeds, her hands in her lap, her eyes soft but steady. The fire beside her was small, yet it cast long shadows. Each woman who entered the circle carried a weight, and in the safety of silence, those weights began to loosen. I lost my child when I was beaten for burning the yam, whispered one. My husband hasn't said my name in 15 years, said another. My father told me silence is a woman's safest clothing. I've been naked my whole life. The words came slowly, but when they did, they became a flood. Pain poured into the night air, raw and unfiltered, rising with the smoke from the fire. But something else rose with it too, something unseen, old, and listening. The hills that bordered Bale had long been silent. But now, in the deep hours between dusk and dawn, they began to groan. The earth trembled faintly beneath the women's feet. Stones that had not moved in centuries shifted positions. Trees leaned slightly toward the village, as though drawn by the voices echoing through the dark. Aguta, who always lingered on the edges of the circle, tilted her head toward the hills. The earth hears you, she whispered. And so does she. She, asked the younger woman. Ebia, Aguta said. The spirit who feeds on broken things. The more you speak, the more she listens. The more you feel, the more she stirs. Word of the gatherings spread, carried in whispers that skipped from mouth to mouth like river pebbles. Soon, changes began to ripple through the fabric of Bale life, not because Noria had demanded them, but because the truth had become contagious. Young girls began refusing their forced marriages, emboldened by the women who now stood behind them. A girl named Iku, just 12, ran crying from her own bride price ceremony and was taken in by Noria. Instead of being punished, others joined her. An older woman, Mama Tenda, blind in one eye and usually ignored, stormed into the village square and declared that her husband of 30 years had never once asked her what she wanted for her own life. The ground seemed to tremble beneath her feet as she spoke. The clan elders watched, stunned into silence. Even men who were once silent bystanders began to squirm. The illusion of control, so long held in place by tradition and fear, was cracking. But none squirmed more than Baroka. Baroka had not slept through the night since the day his hand burned. He tried to drink the visions away, to smoke them into silence, but the dreams came louder with each passing moon. In them, Noria rose from the ashes of a burning village. Her bones glowed. Her eyes were made of embers. She walked through fire, untouched, while he burned with every step he took toward her. Sometimes, his limbs refused to move. Sometimes, he screamed and no sound came out. And always, she said nothing. No curse. No threat. Just silence. The silence that haunted him more than any scream. His once proud posture began to crumble. He walked like a man chased by ghosts. His voice, once thunderous, now cracked like dry leaves. The warriors who once rallied behind him began to avoid his eyes. Even his hounds no longer came when he called. And then, one night, the fire came. It started in the thatch roof of Chief Ndale's house, a building untouched for generations. No one knew how. Some said lightning. Others blamed a careless spark from the hearth. But there had been no storm. And Ndale's hearth had not been lit that night. The flames spread fast. Screams filled the air. Men ran with buckets. Children cried. Women gathered at the edge, covering their mouths, too afraid to move. Then they saw her. Through the thick smoke, Noria walked. Not ran, walked. Calm. Silent. Her dress billowed behind her like smoke given shape. The fire licked at her heels, but she did not burn. Ash fell into her hair like a crown. And those who saw her swore that the fire parted for her. Not out of fear, but reverence. She moved through the burning home and out the other side as if she had merely passed through mist. The screams stopped. No one could speak. Even Chief Ndale, rescued and coughing, turned his eyes to her, not with anger, not with accusation, but with something between awe and dread. She is not cursed, someone whispered. She is chosen. And deep in the hills, something laughed. The spirit of Abia was awake. Noria said nothing. She simply returned to her hut, where the women waited. The message was clear. This was not revenge. This was resurrection. The drums began before sunrise, low, steady, and ominous. Their rhythm pulsed through the village of Bale like a second heartbeat. Children were pulled from their beds, faces scrubbed in silence. Elders wrapped themselves in their ceremonial cloths, their eyes shadowed with worry. The trial had been called. Word had spread swiftly. Noria, the girl who walked through fire, the girl whose bones had once snapped under her husband's rage, was to face the judgment of the spirits. The clan elders, rattled by their eroding authority, had agreed that a final answer was needed. Was she a witch? A curse? Or was she something greater, something sacred? It was Chief Ndale himself who had declared it. Let the fire decide. If she is chosen, the flames shall pass her. If she is cursed, they will devour her. His voice, once strong, had trembled when he spoke. Behind his command was not certainty, but fear. Fear that everything they had believed for generations was unraveling at the hands of a girl who never raised her voice. They chose the old clearing near the edge of the hills, where executions and sacrifices had once been held, though such practices had long since faded into whispered memory. A wooden pillar was raised and ropes prepared. Firewood stacked high around the base. As the sun lifted itself over the horizon, casting a pale gold across the land, the villagers began to gather. They came in silence, eyes lowered, hands clasped. Men stood stiffly, many uncertain. Women pressed together, brows furrowed with quiet fury and desperate hope. Somewhere in the back, Baroka stood with arms crossed, his eyes bloodshot and wild. Noria was led into the clearing by two young guards, boys barely older than children. She did not resist. She walked with calm steps, her dress simple, her face clean, her back straight. She looked not like a prisoner, but like a judge walking to her own court. Aguta followed close behind, though the elders had forbidden her presence. Her eyes met Noria's, and in them, she gave a final warning. Even the spirits cannot walk where fear still clings to bone. Let it go, child. Let it all go. Noria did not speak, but she closed her eyes and nodded. The guards stepped away. Ropes bound her to the pillar, tightly, cruelly. The dry branches below her feet crackled softly in the morning heat. An elder raised a torch, his hands shaking. Let the spirit decide, he said. Then, with a trembling breath, he lowered the flame to the wood. The fire took quickly, hungry and eager. Flames surged up the woodpile in snarling tongues, wrapping around the base of the pillar and reaching for Noria's legs. Gasps escaped the crowd. A few turned away. Some wept. And then, the fire paused. Not died, not extinguished, but paused. The flames stopped climbing. They hovered, hissing, licking the ropes but leaving skin untouched. The villagers leaned forward. Then, the impossible happened. The ropes began to burn, not quickly, but precisely. Each knot seared open as if cut by invisible hands. One by one, the bindings fell away. First her arms. Then her waist. Then her ankles. And then, with no rush, no panic, Noria stepped forward. Out of the fire. Her feet met the earth like thunder in the chest of every watcher. Her dress was untouched. Her skin unmarked. Her hair fell in soft waves down her back, gleaming in the firelight. And in her eyes, something ancient stirred. Not rage. Not triumph. Truth. The fire, still burning behind her, bowed away, parting like a curtain in the wind. A sudden gust swept the clearing. Sparks spiraled into the air like dancing spirits. The earth beneath the villagers trembled, gently, but unmistakably. From deep within the hills came a rumble, like distant thunder or a voice too large for words. And then, silence. Chief Ndale, shaking, dropped to his knees. His ceremonial staff slipped from his hand. He stared at Noria as if seeing a spirit, but not one to be feared. One to be followed. All around, women began to fall to their knees, one after the other. Not in submission, but in surrender to something greater than tradition. Some wept openly, not from fear, but from the release of a lifetime of silence. Others clutched each other, mouths open in awe, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. One little girl pushed through the crowd, breaking free of her mother's arms, and ran to Noria. She wrapped her small arms around her leg and held tightly. Noria looked down at her and finally, smiled. The child whispered something into her dress, too softly to hear. But the wind heard it. And far, far above, the clouds parted. The village of Mbale awoke the next morning to a changed world. The air was thick with a new kind of energy, an invisible current that pulled at the hearts of its people. It was not a shout or a battle cry that had reshaped the clan, it was the quiet presence of a girl who had refused to be broken. Noria. She moved through the village not like a ruler demanding obedience, but like a spirit whose footsteps whispered promises of healing and change. She did not speak much, words had never been her weapon, but every gaze that met hers felt the weight of something profound, the dawn of a new era. Baroka, once feared and revered, was no longer welcome. The clan elders, their hearts heavy with shame and respect, decreed his exile. But exile was no longer a mere punishment, it was a journey of reckoning. Baroka was forced to walk the very path of desolation that Noria had once crawled, the path through the wilderness where the spirits whispered harsh truths. The same earth that had cradled her pain now demanded his humility. As he disappeared into the hills, the villagers breathed a collective sigh, not of victory, but of relief. But the transformation of Mbale was not born from punishment. It was born from awakening. Where once the women had bowed quietly in the shadows, now they sat in council meetings, their voices weaving through decisions that shaped the clan's future. Marriage was no longer a transaction sealed without a woman's consent. Young girls learned to dream, to speak, and to stand, not just in body, but in spirit. The mud hut where Noria had been left to die became a sanctuary, a shrine of truth and resilience. Women came from far and near, not to seek herbs or potions, but to be healed by stories, by the shared breath of survival, and by the silent strength that Noria embodied. Her limp was no longer a sign of brokenness, it was a badge of rebirth, a reminder that the fiercest power comes not from perfection, but from endurance. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the village square, a young girl approached Noria. Her eyes were wide with wonder and unspoken questions. "Did it hurt to stand again?" she asked softly. Noria looked down at her, the flicker of firelight catching the edges of her face. She smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that held centuries of pain and hope. "It hurt more to stay down," she said. The girl nodded, understanding more than words could say. She reached out and took Noria's hand, a hand that had once been bruised and bound, now steady and unyielding. And with every step Noria took after that night, the earth beneath her feet seemed to pulse with remembrance. It held her pain, her struggle, and her triumph. It made room for her power. The clan of Mbale was no longer a place where silence was survival. It was a place where the broken were lifted, the silenced were heard, and the steps of one brave girl shook the entire clan, reminding them all that from the deepest wounds, the strongest roots grow.